Today, we uncover the 8 bacon brands the UK should be warning about and you should never buy. Products that sizzle in the pan, shrink to half their size, and release more cloudy water than actual fat. Packs so pumped with preservatives, colour enhancers and curing agents that calling them bacon is starting to feel generous. For decades, the British public was told that bacon itself was the villain. The salt, the fat and the calories were the reasons behind rising health problems. They told us to avoid fry-ups, to abandon the traditional British breakfast and to replace it with so-called healthier options. Meanwhile, the real danger wasn't bacon at all. It was what these companies quietly turned it into. They swapped real curing for chemical shortcuts. They injected cheap cuts with brine solutions that make the meat balloon in weight. They drenched slices in nitrites that scientists now connect to increased cancer risks. They imported low-grade pork while labelling it as coming from UK farms. And while they pointed fingers at the public for eating poorly, they were mass-producing a product they had altered beyond recognition. Fast forward to today, and the problems linked to processed meats haven't slowed down. High blood pressure is rising. Bowel cancer rates are increasing in younger adults, and the very foods they demonized for years weren't the issue. The issue was the factory-made versions, pretending to be the real thing. Instead of traditional bacon that once came from skilled butchers, we now get industrial slices that fizz, bubble, curl, and release strange white foam in the pan. Products so engineered, softened, flavoured and stabilised that the ingredient list reads like lab work, not breakfast. At number 8, we got Morrison's own brand. Bacon repeated spoilage complaints and excess water injection. I need to start with the brand that shocked me the most when I began researching UK bacon quality. Because Morrison's own brand bacon has a pattern that I cannot ignore. Every time I look into customer reviews, independent tests or food safety discussions, I see the same theme repeated over and over. People open the packet and immediately get hit with a sour, vinegary smell that should never come from cured meat. I read posts from shoppers saying they felt sick before they even cooked the bacon. One person said, "I opened it and thought the fridge had gone off, but it was the bacon." When you hear enough of these stories, you realise this is not a rare issue. It is a pattern. I noticed quickly that the biggest problem with this bacon is water injection. Morrison's own brand rashers are infamous for shrinking in the pan. I tested a pack myself for this research. The rashers looked thick and solid, but once they hit the heat, they shrank almost to half the size, releasing a puddle of white foamy liquid. I have cooked bacon for years, and I know some water loss is normal, but this was excessive. When water escapes this, dramatically, you are not buying bacon. You are buying inflated weight that disappears in the pan. Water injection also encourages bacteria to grow faster. If the curing process is weak and extra water is added, you get a perfect environment for spoilage. This explains the sour smell people keep reporting. Bacon treated correctly should smell like smoke and salt, not like something expired. My deeper concern is that Morrison's often uses cheaper cuts of pork. Some of their bacon ranges contain very low levels of actual muscle meat. If the fat ratio is extremely high, the meat spoils faster because the curing process does not penetrate the fat in the same way. The result is meat that goes off quicker, even before the best before date. People online share stories about buying Morrison's bacon on a Monday, checking it again on Wednesday, and finding discoloration and slime. That should never happen if the product is stored and cured properly. Another uncomfortable truth is related to nitrites. Most supermarket bacon contains sodium nitrite. It helps with colour and preservation, but the amount added varies by brand. When I looked at multiple independent lab results, Morrison's own brand consistently leaned toward the higher nitrite range. High nitrite levels not only raise long-term health concerns, but they also signal poor quality because the manufacturer compensates for weaker curing or cheaper pork by using chemicals to stabilize the product. I reached a point where I no longer trust Morrison's own brand bacon for daily use. When a pack of bacon causes more anxiety than appetite, that is a sign that something is wrong. Yes, the price is lower, but the risks feel higher. This is why Morrison starts my list at number 8. Number 7, Tesco wood smoked, streaky bacon, high sodium, and aggressive preservative use. Tesco has a complicated reputation in the UK. Some of their premium ranges are excellent, but their cheapest lines continue to concern me, and none more than Tesco Everyday Value Bacon. I have cooked it many times in the past. I thought I was stretching my budget. Instead, I was eating something that barely qualified as bacon once I learned the truth. The first issue is the meat quality. Tesco Everyday Value. Bacon uses some of the lowest grade pork legally allowed. When I finally looked at the back of the packet, I understood why it cooked so strangely. The meat-to-fat ratio is unbalanced. Some rashers are almost entirely fat, others are thin little sheets with barely any structure. When I cooked a pack during this research, the rashers curled up, released a flood of water, and almost disappeared in size. The bacon looked promising before cooking, but turned into scraps in the pan. The reason for this is water injection. Everyday Value bacon is filled with added water to increase weight. It feels like a cheat. You pay for 300 grams of bacon, but only get about 180 grams after the water escapes as steam. When the water hits a boil, it boils off, and the bacon steams rather than fries. Instead of crisping, it turns pale, rubbery, and soggy. I saw the same complaint repeated on forums and reviews. One person wrote, "My bacon boiled itself in the pan. It did not even fry." I also discovered that Tesco uses sodium nitrite and phosphates at noticeable levels in this range. Nitrites help with shelf life, but when combined with fillers and water, they create processed products that are far from natural. Phosphates are added to help the meat retain water. The result is bacon that looks thick in the pack, but collapses immediately during cooking. In the long term, high phosphate intake has been linked to bone weakening. I felt uneasy, realizing that families buying cheap bacon might be exposing themselves to unnecessary additives just to save a few pounds each week. The historical context is worse. Tesco was deeply involved in the 2013 horse meat scandal. Their value burgers tested positive for almost 30% horse DNA. That incident destroyed my trust in their cheapest meat lines. And if they could not control what went into their value burgers, how can I trust their value bacon? Even though the scandal involved beef, it revealed a deeper problem in supply chain oversight. Customers frequently complain about Tesco Everyday Value bacon smelling strange when opened. The meat sometimes has a grey tone that should not appear in cured bacon. I read a detailed review from a shopper who said, "I bought this because it was cheap. It tasted metallic like chemicals. Never again." When I read multiple comments like this, I understood that the issue was not isolated. Tesco Everyday Value bacon is a classic example of a product designed for financial convenience rather than nutritional quality. Yes, it is cheap, but it feels like it belongs in the category of products I would only eat if I had absolutely no other choice. The more I investigated it, the more I felt uncomfortable with how many additives and how much water go into a product that is supposed to be as simple as salted, cured pork. It deserves its place at number 7. At number 6, Asda Everyday Essentials Bacon High Water Percentage, and inconsistent quality. Asda's Just Essentials line is designed for people trying to stretch every penny. But when it comes to bacon, this range crosses a line that I personally cannot overlook. I have bought Asda Just Essentials bacon before, and even without research, I noticed something was wrong. The smell was strong and off-putting, even before the use-by date. Once I began digging, the truth became worse. One of the biggest concerns is the aerobic bacterial count in some batches, which tested supermarket chicken in the past and found Asda among the highest for contamination. While this test focused on chicken, it exposed a pattern in Asda's cold chain management. When a store struggles to maintain proper temperature and storage for one type of meat, it raises questions about all other meat products, especially something as delicate as bacon. Customers repeatedly report that Asda budget bacon spoils early or smells sour immediately after opening. That smell is usually caused by either poor curing or water injection. Cheap bacon tends to include a lot of added water and salt brine. In Asda's case, the water loss during cooking is dramatic. I cooked a pack specifically for this research. The rashers released so much water that the bacon never crisped. Instead, it simmered. Then it suddenly began sticking to the pan as the water evaporated and the chemical brine concentrated. The flavour tells another story. It tastes aggressively salty and strangely acidic. I learned this is often due to curing accelerators and preservatives used to stabilise meat made from low-grade cuts. When bacon tastes like chemicals rather than smoke or pork, something has gone wrong. Asda's Just Essentials sausages often contain low meat percentages, around the 42 to 50% range. While bacon is a different product, the trend is the same. Asda pushes the production cost as low as possible. This results in meat that feels flimsy, pale, and watery. Customers online describe the bacon as tearing while raw or turning mushy during cooking. There are also troubling reports from factory workers. Anonymous statements mention rushed cleaning between production batches, which increases contamination risk. If equipment is not cleaned properly, bacteria or residue can transfer between batches. While these are reports rather than confirmed investigations, the consistency of the claims raises concerns for me. What bothers me most is that Asda Just Essentials bacon is widely purchased by families who simply want to save money. People assume that bacon is bacon, no matter the price. But after researching this brand, I realised that the safety and nutritional differences are significant. Cheap food should not mean unsafe food. Yet with Asda Just Essentials bacon, the risk feels higher than the price justifies. This is why it ranks at number 6 on my list. Number 5 might surprise you. Co-op Honest Value. Bacon processed cuts with high fat ratios and brine pumping. I need to be completely honest about this one because Co-op's irresistible bacon fooled me for years. The branding, the black packaging, the promises of premium British outdoor bred pork, it all creates the illusion that you're buying something special. But when I really started paying attention, I realised the difference between the packaging and the product is shocking. The first thing that made me suspicious was the colour. Co-op Irresistible Bacon often has that overly bright pink tone that looks unnatural. Properly cured bacon has a muted reddish colour, not neon. This happens because some batches contain noticeably high levels of added nitrites and nitrates. Nitrites are legal, but when they're used heavily, the bacon becomes chemically preserved rather than naturally cured. It might look beautiful in the packet, but once it hits the pan, the truth comes out. The rashers release excess liquid, not just water, but a salty, foamy brine. When bacon releases that much fluid, it tells me two things: too much curing solution and too much water. The bacon ends up steaming itself instead of frying. I tested a pack during this research, and it shrank dramatically. I'm not talking about typical shrinkage. I'm talking about losing almost half the volume. It left a pool of white residue in the pan that tasted aggressively salty. The next concern is spoilage. I can't tell you how many Co-op customers I've seen complaining about the bacon going slimy or sour smelling before the use-by date. I've personally had to throw away 2 packs in the past because the meat developed that sticky, slippery, texture-cured pork should never have. When bacon spoils that quickly, it means the curing wasn't strong enough or the storage chain broke somewhere. Either way, the risk falls on us. The irony is that the Irresistible line is marketed as premium. You expect consistency, quality, and proper smoking. Instead, you get rashers that taste overly salted, harsh, and strangely metallic. Nothing about the flavour matches the image Co-op presents. I've tried both smoked and unsmoked versions, and the inconsistency is unbelievable. One pack tastes acceptable, and the next tastes like something from the cheapest budget aisle. The biggest issue for me, and the reason this bacon ranks at number 5, is that Co-op tries to sell itself as an ethical, trustworthy brand, yet its bacon has some of the same processing problems as cheaper supermarket ranges. If I'm paying premium prices, I want meat that actually deserves the label. Co-op Irresistible Bacon simply doesn't. Number 4, Sainsbury's Woodland Bacon. Sustainability branding, but poor meat quality and processing issues. I really wanted to like this one. Sainsbury's Woodland Bacon looks clean, responsible, and environmentally friendly. They highlight animal welfare, sustainable farming, and woodland rearing. It sounds wholesome. It sounds trustworthy. But after cooking multiple packs for this research, I realized something doesn't add up. The branding suggests quality, but the actual meat often feels processed, watery, and inconsistent. The rashers look thick and rustic when raw, but once they hit the pan, they behave exactly like cheap, heavily brined bacon. They shrink rapidly, they curl aggressively, and they leak an astonishing amount of liquid. The heritage farming story completely falls apart when the meat behaves like pumped-up supermarket produce. I'm not exaggerating about the water. This bacon boils in the pan. The rashers hiss and spit like they're defrosting, even though they're fully chilled. I found myself constantly draining the pan to get the bacon to crisp. No premium bacon should force me to do that. I began comparing labels, and the answer became clear. Sainsbury's Woodland Bacon contains significant added water through curing brine. In fact, the water content is noticeably higher than in their normal mid-range and premium lines. What bothered me most was how different each pack tasted. One pack tasted decent, smoky and savoury. The next pack tasted bland, rubbery, and almost sweet. This inconsistency signals weak quality control. If the farm source is truly as carefully curated as the marketing claims, why does the product vary so much? Another concern is nitrite levels. When I studied multiple tests and customer reports, I saw a trend. The Woodland range often contains high curing salt concentrations. High nitrite levels are used to maintain colour and extend shelf life when the pork is not consistent in quality. That goes completely against the natural woodland reared, responsibly sourced image Sainsbury's tries to present. It feels like a branding trick rather than a real improvement in the meat. I also noticed that the fat distribution is strange. Thick fat edges that never crisp properly, and lean sections that overcook immediately. This usually means the pork was cut quickly and without precision. Again, this contradicts the idea that these pigs were raised with care. Excellent farming does not guarantee excellent slicing, curing, or packaging. Sainsbury's appears to rely on the farm story to distract from the fact that the processing is still industrial. Here's the painful truth I had to accept. Sustainable branding does not guarantee quality. Sainsbury's Woodland Bacon is expensive, beautifully packaged, and marketed like a premium, ethical choice. But the meat behaves like low-tier brined bacon, disguised with a feel-good label. Once I realized this, I lost trust in the product completely. That is how it ended up at number 4. At number 3, we have Richmond Back, bacon low meat quality, high additive HS, and processed pork engineering. If there is one bacon brand that consistently shocks me with how artificial it tastes, it's Richmond. Most people recognize Richmond for their sausages, which already have a terrible reputation for low meat content, fillers, and mechanically separated meat. But their bacon is one of the most processed tasting meats I have ever cooked. The thing that struck me first is the texture. Richmond bacon doesn't feel like pork. It feels like something reconstructed. When I pulled a rasher from the pack, it stretched oddly, almost like pressed luncheon meat. Bacon should tear naturally along the muscle fibers. Richmond bacon bends. It doesn't behave like fresh pork. It behaves like something assembled in a factory. The flavor raises even more red flags. It tastes intensely salty and slightly sweet, with a fake smokiness that feels chemical. Natural smoked bacon has depth. Richmond's version tastes thin, artificial, and metallic. This usually means one thing: heavy use of flavorings and liquid smoke. When real smoking isn't done, manufacturers rely on artificial smoke additives. It gives that instant smoky hit, but none of the authenticity. The aftertaste is what exposes it. It lingers like chemicals rather than wood. When I checked the ingredients, everything made sense. Richmond uses added water, stabilizers, phosphates, dextrose, preservatives, and nitrites. It's a long list. These additives are legal, but they transform bacon into an ultra-processed food rather than a cured meat. Phosphates help retain water. Dextrose boosts color. Nitrites boost shelf life. And together, they create a rasher that shrinks dramatically and tastes artificially enhanced. Richmond sausages are known for extremely low meat percentages, sometimes around 42%. While bacon is inherently higher in meat, the same processing philosophy is reflected in how Richmond produces its bacon. Cheap pork trimmings, heavy brine, artificial flavorings, maximum weight gain through water, minimum cost, maximum additives. It's a perfect example of engineered meat. Another disturbing pattern is spoilage. I cannot count how many times people have complained about Richmond bacon smelling sour immediately after opening. This suggests weak curing and poor cold chain control. One shopper wrote, "Opened it on the day of purchase, and the smell almost knocked me out." I know that smell. I've encountered it myself. Once bacon has that sour, acidic scent, it's a bacterial warning sign. Cooking Richmond bacon feels wrong. It doesn't crisp properly. It curls in unpredictable ways. The fat doesn't render naturally. Instead, it releases a strange, oily liquid that mixes with the water to form a cloudy residue. After cooking, I am left with strips that taste like salt and chemicals rather than pork. What bothers me the most is how many people buy Richmond products because they recognize the name. It's one of the biggest processed meat brands in the UK. People trust it without realizing how heavily engineered the food actually is. The advertising plays on nostalgia and family-friendly imagery. But behind that image is some of the most ultra-processed bacon on the market. Richmond bacon earns its place at number 3 because the product feels so artificial that I genuinely question how much real pork I'm eating. Between the additives, the strange texture, the spoilage reports, and the ultra-processed nature of the meat, I simply cannot recommend it. If someone is trying to reduce artificial ingredients or eat cleaner, this is the absolute opposite of what they should buy. Down to number 2, Denny bacon. Repeated safety alerts, high salt loads, and questionable processing. I'll be honest, Denny bacon shocked me more than almost any brand on this list. I always thought of Denny as one of those quiet, harmless, old-school names you see in the supermarket fridge. It looks traditional, It looks trustworthy. It looks like something your grandparents might buy. But when I started digging, cooking, tasting and comparing, the reality of Denny bacon felt completely different from the warm, nostalgic image they try to project. The first thing that hit me was the salt. I am not exaggerating when I say Denny bacon is some of the saltiest bacon I have ever eaten. The sodium levels in certain packs are so high that one serving takes up more than half of your entire recommended daily salt intake. When bacon is aggressively salty, it's often because the curing is rushed or designed to mask weaker quality meat. Salt is the oldest preservative in the book, and with Denny, it feels like they lean on it heavily. Then there's the nitrite issue. Denny bacon often sits on the higher end of nitrite content compared to other mainstream brands. Nitrites aren't just flavor agents, they're chemical preservatives that give bacon its pink color and prevent bacteria. They are legal, but in high amounts they raise long-term health concerns. Several European health boards have issued warnings about nitrite-heavy processed meats, increasing colorectal cancer risk. When I cooked Denny rashers, that slightly chemical smell that rises from the pan told me everything I needed to know. It didn't smell like smoke, it smelled like a curing lab. What disturbed me more was the texture. Denny rashers don't feel like natural pork slices. They feel soft, overly pliable, almost sponge-like before you cook them. Proper bacon has structure, muscle fibers, marbling and firm edges. Denny bacon bends like something that has been pumped with brine. Once in the pan, it loses shape quickly and begins ejecting liquid at an alarming rate. Most bacon loses some moisture, of course, but Denny releases so much water that the rashers almost boil in their own brine. Watching it cook genuinely made me uncomfortable. Bacon shouldn't behave like that. And the shrinkage? It's honestly absurd. I cooked 6 rashers and ended up with something closer to shrink-wrapped bacon crisps. They lost size, thickness and flavor instantly. If you've ever wondered why cheap bacon disappears in the pan, it's because water, phosphates and salt are artificially injected to increase weight. That's not quality, that's manipulation. Then there's the safety history. Denny has had multiple recalls linked to processed meats over the years. Not always bacon, but enough to raise eyebrows. Listeria concerns, labeling errors, storage temperature issues. I found more red flags than I expected. When a company struggles repeatedly with quality control across different meat lines, it's impossible for me to trust that the bacon line is magically exempt. But the thing that truly pushed Denny near the top of this list was the realization that the brand hides behind a wholesome, trustworthy exterior. The packaging looks traditional and homely, like something produced with care. But when I compare that image to what actually cooks in the pan, the disconnect is massive. Denny bacon feels like a heavily engineered, chemically preserved, artificially enhanced product, wearing a mask of nostalgia. That's why Denny lands at number 2, a brand that looks comforting on the outside, but tells a very different story once you actually cook it. Number 1, Danepak bacon. Excessive brine injection, chemical taste, and alarming spoilage complaints. Placing Danepak at number 1 wasn't even a difficult decision. Once I started researching and testing it, everything pointed to the same conclusion. This is the bacon I personally avoid above all others. And I'm saying that as someone who has bought Danepak many times in the past without thinking twice. But now that I've seen what's behind it, I can't unsee it. The first red flag is the water content. Danepak is infamous among bacon lovers because it releases staggering amounts of liquid when cooked. I don't mean a little moisture. I mean puddles of white, foamy brine that fill the bottom of the pan. When bacon behaves like that, it means only one thing: excessive brine injection. Companies do this to increase weight and profit. More water means heavier rashers, which means you pay for liquid instead of meat. But the real problem isn't just the water, it's the phosphates. Phosphates bind water into the meat, allowing the bacon to hold far more brine than it naturally should. Danepack bacon has been repeatedly criticised for its soft, mushy texture before cooking, that telltale sign of phosphate-laden processing. When I touched a raw rasher, it didn't feel like pork. It felt artificially tenderised, almost rubbery. Natural pork doesn't behave like that. Then there's the nitrite issue. Danepack uses curing salts aggressively, and you can taste it. The flavour is sharp, chemical, almost metallic. When I fried it, the smell rising from the pan instantly reminded me of something synthetic rather than smoky. That harsh bite isn't smoke, it's chemical curing. What really disturbed me was the number of spoilage complaints I found. Customers regularly say their Danepack bacon smells sour or sulphur-like the moment they open it, even when it's well within the date. I've smelled that smell and you never forget it. It hits you like rotten eggs mixed with ammonia. That kind of early spoilage signals a serious breakdown in the cold chain or insufficient curing. Then there's the colour. Proper bacon doesn't glow bright pink. Danepack rashers often look artificially vivid, like they've been dyed. And once they cook, they turn unnaturally pale. Good smoked bacon darkens when fried. Poor bacon fades. The shrinkage is unbelievable. Danepack rashers can lose up to half their size. That's not cooking, that's evaporating. You're left with thin, brittle pieces that taste overwhelmingly salty and chemically aggressive. Finally, the taste. I've never eaten bacon that tasted so synthetic. Instead of rich umami pork flavour, you get a chemical punch, followed by an aftertaste that sits on your tongue like preservatives. If Richmond tastes artificial, Danepack tastes industrial.